Welcome, everybody, to Shoot the Gap, the IDP show here on the Fantasy and Frames podcast. I'm your host this week, Jorge Edwards. This week, no Nate Markham, no Hollywood Titan. You know what? Don't let them know, but I found somebody better. Talking about Mr. Leo McNeeley, a.k.a. Master IDP on Twitter. You may know him as the number one ranker in 2022 over at Fantasy Pros in their ECR competition for IDP rankings. You can find a lot of his work over at RPO Football. I'm excited to have him on. You should be excited to hear him talk. So with that, Gator J, hit it. All right. Well, before we get into today's show, what? Screw it. We're going to go off script a little bit, and Gator loves it when I go off script a little bit. Leo, how the heck are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Great to be back on. I haven't been on with you guys since the season started. I think a little bit before that I was on, so it's good to see you guys again. I know I missed you at the expo, but hopefully I'll get to see you next year.
Oh, if there's one thing I've learned about the whole falling down the stairs thing and getting one's leg injured is to now going forward in my life, I will be the slowest walker ever when it comes to going up and down stairs. It's like, nope. I'm going to be like the tortoise trying to get up the stairs. I don't care if it takes me forever. I'm going to be super careful because I do not want to miss the opportunity to meet you and talk shop with you on the IDP panel at the Fantasy Football Expo. So I agree. I definitely regret not being able to make it, but looking forward to the Expo in 24. Before we get started, why don't you tell the folks a little bit about, who have not have tuned in during the summer about, what you're doing in the fantasy space as far as like, website and all the other good stuff.
Sure. So, I'm the founder of RPOfootball.com. You can find my weekly IDP rankings over there. We also have offensive rankings, but I'm also doing IDP content for FTN. I'm doing a weekly waiver wire article for IDP and same rankings over on both sites. And then you can also find the rankings over at Fantasy Pros. I mean, I'm a numbers guy, so I love projections and numbers. So rankings are really my forte, and I've had some success with that. So that's where you can find my stuff. We also have some IDP prop betting that we've been getting into this year. So that's been a lot of fun.
Dude, that's awesome. And for those who don't know, Leo has been in the past 3 weeks the number one ranker in the IDP ECR competition at Fantasy Pro. So congratulations to you. It's a shame we couldn't get Nate Markham on the show. He's living the good life in Cancun right now. So hope you're enjoying it, Nate. But we got to get you on again before the fantasy football season is over just to talk shop because you can't have too many great IDP minds on one show. I bow down to you and you other guys. You guys are fantastic. So thank you very much for joining us. And before we get into today's content, just want to remember, folks, head over to fantasyandframes.com, read all of our offense, but more importantly, read our IDP articles, whether it's waiver wire, whether it's starts and sits. Nate Markham does a fantastic job reviewing each and every single game from an IDP perspective in a series called the IDP Roundup. It's a great tool for those looking to find the advantage of which players showed out, which ones did not, and what to expect of their output going forward from an IDP fantasy perspective. Don't forget also to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts to the Fantasy and Frames podcast, where we have 3 major shows on there. Earlier tonight, we had Dynasty 365. For those who are watching on 4th and Frames, who just had Scott Porter from Friday Night Lights join the show. That's another week-to-week redraft content-based show in season. Of course, we have Shoot the Gap here, our IDP show. And don't forget our waiver wire show on Tuesdays at 7:30 p.m. Eastern with Gator J and Zach. And don't forget also the Fantasy and Frames pregame show on every Sunday from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. And with that, let's get into some news and notes, baby. Leo, it is like every single week, and I guess this is true with all of fantasy football, whether it's offense or defense. Rougarou, welcome to the chat. Thank you very much for tuning in. everybody's getting hurt. Offense, defense, like the hurt bug has no bias to what side of the ball you play on. Everyone's getting hurt, or in this case, starting off with Denzel Perryman here, Houston Texans linebacker, he's getting suspended. That came out of nowhere, right? We just saw him come back. What are your thoughts here with Perryman getting suspended, as well as the outlook for some of these Houston linebackers?
Yeah, so Perriman, he got suspended 3 games. I didn't see the hits yet to know how if he had a argument there, but it sounded like they just reduced it to 2 games today. I think James Thrash went ahead and knocked it down to 2. We saw earlier in the season somebody got their suspension knocked down, but still 2 games. We've got the Houston linebackers. We thought for a little while it was going to be earlier in the season. It was going to be Henry To'oTo'o was going to be the guy, and then then Cashman was looking good, and then Perriman came in, and then Christian Harris was doing a little bit. So with Perriman out, we got 3 guys there that I don't know even who's going to be the guy this week. Cashman, Harris, To'oTo'o. I mean, I've taken the position from before the season started, like I was just avoiding the whole situation with Houston linebackers. I didn't want anything to do with it just because I didn't know how it was going to shake out. And I feel like I still don't know how it's going to shake out this week. So I'm generally playing somebody else in the same tier over these guys just because, I'd rather have something more sure, closer to 90% snaps. And if they split these 3 guys in 75%, I don't know how it's going to shake out. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it was very interesting seeing, with Perryman last week, see the majority of. Well, I guess we were kind of expecting Perryman to kind of like return to that, full-time role as he had earlier in the season before he got injured. But you thought with Cashman, as well as he'd been playing, there'd be a reason to keep both of these guys on the field. And you saw Cashman take the number 3 spot in terms of total defensive snap percentage. So that really came out of nowhere. I'll give you my thoughts when we get to our next segment, though, on that. But we do have a question here from Rugaru in the chat. Look, he's 6-4, looking at making the playoffs, and he needs to clean some dead weight off his roster. Who would you drop, Leo? EJ Speed, the aforementioned Denzel Perryman, or Draymond Jones?
I mean, generally, I'm keeping line. I mean, none of these names, jump off that I have to keep any of them. But if I'm dropping somebody, it's probably Draymond Jones. I mean, I'm keeping the linebackers for the upside. I mean, we don't know, we don't know how deep his team is. But like any of the Speed or Perryman could jump back into a full-time role at some point down the line. Whereas, Draymond Jones, I think you could probably find a replacement at defensive line.
He says here also that he picked up Landon Roberts and BJ Ojulari along with Bryce Huff. I feel like those are the additions you want, right? Versus the ones that he's just talking about with Speed, Perryman, and Draymond Jones. And not to mention, that's good job, Ruguru. So let's carry on here. We talk about, the Pittsburgh Steelers just cannot literally catch a break at linebacker. 2 weeks ago, Cole Holcomb, I haven't even watched the replay of the injury. I have no desire to watch the replay of the injury. All I know that it was a very bad knee injury out for the year. Flash forward a week, Quan Alexander tore his Achilles this past week. Man, Nate Markham and I have had differing opinions over Landon Roberts.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, the deal has been over the course of his career, I hold out hope that he will eventually show promise and consistent promise. Nate Markham's like, yeah, no, he's garbage by, right? and so I'm it's after the pregame show, and I wake up to a text. I took a little nap before the kickoff, and I ended up sleeping into most of the 1 o'clock games. And anyhow, I wake up and I get a text from Nate Markham. He's like, so Quan Alexander is out of the game. And I'm like, okay. So he's like, well, so pump your brakes on cheering for Landon Roberts if he puts up a big game because it's due to injury, not for anything else. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, it sucks. But the fact of the matter is now Roberts, he falls into that full-time role there. Is there anybody else in that linebacking core that you trust in certain tier lineup or, for Pittsburgh there, Leo?
Well, no, I mean, right now it seems, he picked up the green dot this past week, and I think the rumblings out of camp right now, as I said, he's been practicing with it. I think they have Mikael Walker on the practice squad, and he's apparently has got the sticker too, but he's not, it's not activated right now in practice. But doesn't mean he couldn't slide in there. But I mean, going into this week, I would feel confident that Roberts is gonna have that full time role this week, or close to it, 90% or what. I don't think that they trust Robinson to be the guy. So I think Roberts gets the chance this week. He'd be somebody I would be inserting in my lineup. He looked pretty good a couple weeks ago when I watched. I didn't see this past week, but 2 weeks ago I think he outproduced Kwame Alexander on lesser snaps. I think 2 weeks ago, if I remember that right. So he's somebody I'm not excited about, but like at this point in the season, if you're looking to plug somebody in your lineup, full-time snap guy is gonna get on the field and make some plays. You could do a lot worse.
No, absolutely. And one of the things I liked about Roberts heading into this past week was the fact that he had been one of the most highly efficient tacklers amongst all the linebackers on the Steelers the entire past month, right? And so only thing that was a negative on him was just a lack of, a full-time workload. But he came in last week. He played, 95.6% of snaps in all 3 downs. 10.8 tackle efficiency. He was serviceable. He was good, and like you said, Michael Walker. We don't know what's happening with that situation. So I'm with you. Basically, is what I'm trying to get at. I'm with you with Timo Landon, and I think going forward, the tackle volume is just going to be there. Switching over to
one more second. So I forgot. He also has a great matchup this week. He's got the Browns, who have been giving up a lot. They're going to be committed to the run with Watson out and DTR taking over. So yeah, I think I have him later on in my notes here.
There you go. Little tease for the folks there. Next player, Jordan Hicks on IR. That came out of nowhere. I didn't really see him get injured, but then again, I probably maybe wasn't watching at that point. But with Jordan Hicks on IR, what are we doing here at linebacker for the Minnesota Vikings?
Yeah, so I was definitely watching this one because I had some money on Jordan Hicks getting 8.5 tackles, and a little disappointing. So he actually ended up getting 7 tackles on 27 snaps before he got injured. So he was being very efficient. That's over 20% efficiency. So he came out, he came back in, and he only got 7 tackles. But when he came out, Ivan Pace took over. So the rookie, I think from Cincinnati, he's a little undersized. That's why he was undrafted. I mean, he's one of the top, most efficient guys in college of tackles. And he played pretty well in the preseason, and in limited action, he's been very efficient from a tackle perspective. Still a little undersized. We'll see how he holds up in full games, but I think he's the guy to take over. I know Asamoah, Pace took over from Asamoah, and Asamoah is a little bit banged up right now. We'll see if he comes back, but I think it's Pace's job right now for this week, and we'll take it 1 week at a time.
You bring up a very good point. You look at earlier in the season, Ivan Pace, he was, for all intents and purposes, a suitable linebacker 3 in certain situations, depending on how deep you're going in terms of roster spots for IDP. Definitely, if you had an IDP flex position, I think he would definitely fall into that. But then as the Vikings slowly started shifting away and using 3 safeties versus the 2 linebackers, he just kind of fell out of favor, so to speak, with Jordan Hicks being there. I do want to talk to Cruz Garcia in the chat right now. So you're asking a question for offense. If you hit me up at Jorge B. Edwards on Twitter or at the Fantasy and Frames account, we'll be happy to answer all your offensive questions. But for IDP shows, we like to keep it to IDP specific only. But we are definitely there for you. Just hit us up in our DMs, and we'll be happy to answer all your questions. Switching now back to news and notes. Sam Hubbard is not going to play tomorrow night against the Ravens. What do we think about Myles Murphy, the rookie coming in here for the Bengals? A lot of the talk about him coming out of college was like, he's really good in run support. He's really good at pass rushing. Depending on contract situations heading into 2024, Sam Hubbard or Trey Hendrickson might be people that they potentially move on from. And Myles Murphy is kind of the one that's just basically waiting in the wings there. But we saw Myles Murphy split some snaps last week. What are your thoughts on him? Is he even somebody that you'd consider playing, given now what we're hearing out of Baltimore, that basically both offensive tackles are pretty banged up there on, heading into Thursday Night Football?
So for Myles Murphy, I mean, the snaps haven't been big enough for me to want to put him in my lineup. I think this past week he was, I want to say 36%. Just not enough. I need to see a higher snap count before I'm willing to go in on somebody. I usually like to see at least 50%, or they'd have to be crazy productive with their snaps. So Sam Hubbard's out. Trey Hendrickson hyperextended his knee, but it sounds like he might give it a go on Thursday. That could impact the snaps. But I think Myles Murphy got out snapped by, I think it was Cam Sample, I think was the guy. So I'm not excited about Murphy. I need to see more of him. But going back to, he's a great dynasty hold for me. I was a little bit more excited before I think one of these guys got extended recently. You and I think we talked about Myles Murphy in the summer, back when I think, either Hendrickson or Hubbard got extended. And
Right.
we were both hoping that Murphy within year 2 would be the guy, because I think he has both that run stuffing ability and pass rush upside that can kind of, do a little bit of both that, to counteract Hubbard and Hendrickson. But I'm just waiting to see a little bit more. I'm not rushing, but for a dynasty, put him on there and see if he pops up. But you raise a good point about Baltimore's offensive line. But I just need to see a little bit higher snap count before I'm ready to put him in my lineup.
Yep, makes 100% sense to me. And speaking of sense, let's get into some money or Mirage. All right, folks, the concept of this segment is pretty simple. We're following performances from this past week, and we're asking you, is what we saw in week 10 money in terms of what you can expect from the player's performance going forward, or a mirage, aka a one-off that was just an anomaly, and you should not expect that going forward. And let's start us off with the surprise of the week for me, for IDP at defensive line. BJ Ojulari in Fantasy Pros scoring was the DL3 with 22 points. He was tied with Zaven Collins at the edge position in total defensive snap share, led the team in passing down snap share, had a 33% pressure rate, a 22.2% win rate, stats courtesy of PFF. One game sample in terms of a huge workload. In your opinion, is BJ Ojulari a money play going forward, or was this a mirage?
I mean, for the rest of the season, I would say a mirage. I mean, I haven't seen enough body of work before this to get too excited about it. He faced the Falcons this past week, which are a pretty good matchup for defensive ends. I mean, I can hold my hat on the 50. I think it was 52% snap percentage.
Mm-hmm.
So he was higher than he's been the last several weeks, but I haven't seen enough production before this to go in. I need to see a couple more weeks of this. If we saw this production in week 1, people would go big crazy, and he would be, everybody would be spending all their free agent money on Ojulari. When it happens here in the middle of the season, people say, well, he didn't do anything for 8 weeks. People spend $1 on him, but so I just need to see more from him. I mean, obviously he's a rookie, a 2nd round pick rookie, so he's got the long-term potential. I mean, I was excited about him in the summer, but I think we all get excited about the rookie defensive ends in the summer. Something to talk about. And but a lot of times they take time to develop. I mean, if you go back to, I think Thibodeau last year, he got hot in the second half of the season. I mean, that could be what happens here. I mean, but usually I need to see it for more before I'm going crazy. I don't think I put him in my waiver wire article this past week because I'm not confident that he's going to repeat that.
So it's funny you mentioned Kayvon Thibodeau going, turning the corner last year. It just so happens that happened to be against my Washington Commanders. So thank you very much for opening up old wounds there. I think he's money from this perspective. And this is kind of like why I threw him in my waiver wire article this week, is if you have a deep enough bench and you can stash a potential, DL 1 or DL 2 who's emerging this late into the season, do it. Because finding those elite people with the elite metrics is hard to do. It's hard to find at this point in the season. If you have a shallow bench, yes, leave him out on waivers. Keep that little notification tag there just in case he does something again, and just keep him in the back of your mind. But if you have a deep bench, it's crazy that he stepped into a team leading defensive snap share for me. What really gives it away is the pressure rate and the win rate. It's really impressive. And another thing for me, which I really liked, was his total tackle numbers. So like Nate and I, we've gone back and forth with this as far as like, what do you look for when you look at defensive linemen or edge rushers for your fantasy football rosters? And one of the things I like to really parse out first is take away the impact play, take away the sack or the TFL or the quarterback hit, and look at the tackles. Just look at the tackles as a floor. And if a person is getting 10 points a game off of 2 sacks but only has 1 tackle, well, then that tells me that person is basically big play dependent, and I'm kind of concerned about what to expect from them. This guy had 8 tackles last week. Like, that's a pretty decent floor to build off of. And now you throw on the impact plays on top of that. That for me, on top of the pressure rate and the win rate and the team leading snap share, that for me, that was a little bit too hard to ignore. So I think he's money as a good stash on your bench, but I can definitely understand taking the Mirage stance in terms of we just haven't seen enough yet. So yeah, I could definitely see both sides of that coin. Switching over to Chicago. Look, I'm a Maryland alum. I have the Maryland shirt on now. By decree, being a Maryland alum, I have to track all NFL players who played at Maryland. Not really. But this one in particular, I just happened to have over the course of his career. Yannick Ngakoue, formerly a first-round pick of the Jacksonville Jaguars, then went to the Oakland Raiders, and then went to the Indianapolis Colts, and is now a Chicago Bear. He finished last week as the DL27 in Fantasy Pros, scoring with 9.5 points. He led all edge rushers on the team in defensive snap share. Here's the thing. What are your thoughts, Leo, before we get into whether this is a money mirage in terms of future outlook? What is your stance on, a defensive line having a really good, like borderline great edge rusher on one side, and then the other guy on the other side? You know what I mean? Are you of the stance that, the person who's really, really great draws so much attention that it frees up one-on-one matchups for the other guy to beat? It makes them a little bit more of a sneaky play from week to week? Or does that not enter your equation when you're thinking about how to assess the value of a defensive lineman?
Yeah, it definitely enters my mind. I mean, I'm trying to keep an eye on like who's getting double teamed and who might get freed up for other. I mean, a lot, but they even like what side do these guys play on? Are they on the right side or the left side? Are they moving them into both sides? Like who's got matchups? So there's a lot that it goes into kind of how I look at these players. But yeah, sometimes that does help. We look at, sometimes like with TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith. I mean, sometimes, you see, Highsmith actually did sometimes better without TJ Watt there last year, but he's popped off for some good games. So sometimes it really depends on the matchups of who they're facing and how they're going to try to attack them. So sometimes it's a good thing, and sometimes it's a bad thing. You know, it's a little bit of both.
Nope, that makes a lot of sense. So, we talk about the DL27 just outside DL2 range. Let's take it from the perspective of like, okay, Montez Sweat is going to command a lot of attention, freeing up Yannick Ngakoue. Had only 2 tackles last week, hasn't really blown the doors off. Do you think his performance this week is, or his outlook is a money or a mirage, given the fact that they did make, by they, I mean the Chicago Bears, an upgrade along the defensive line, potentially freeing up Ngakoue going forward?
I mean, I would lean Mirage, but I think he can be money with the right weeks and the right matchups. If you actually see where he got his sacks this year, he got a sack against the Panthers and he got a sack against the Commanders. Well, everybody's getting a sack against the Commanders.
Easy, man. Take it easy.
And the Giants. You just play. I'll say they both play each other this week, but you pick anybody that's playing either of those teams, and they're likely to get a sack. So I'm going to say mostly a mirage, but I think he can be money against the right teams, the right matchups. Down the road. I mean, I love watching him play for the Colts. So I think that mostly mirage, but I think if you find the right week and you need to plug him in and you see that he's got a good matchup against a defender or an offensive lineman, then you might find that he could be money for you. But most weeks he's not going to be money for me.
I 100% agree with what you just said. Ruguru in the chat is asking a question. So when you draft, and we can both answer this one, are you targeting the pass rusher or the tackle monster with sack upside? Leo, what are your thoughts there?
Most leagues, I'm drafting for the pass rusher. That's with the guy that's going to get me those big points. But there's been a few leagues where whoever set up the scoring just really nuked the sack and tackle for loss, QB hit, and all. They really nuked it. So like there are a few leagues where I do tackle or target the tackle monster, but most times I'm going after the pass rusher that's going to get me that sack, going to get me that big week. I mean, I'm looking for my linebackers and safeties to get me the consistent scoring from tackles. So I like to swing for it with those defensive linemen that can put me up a big number there. You don't want to do that with every position. Kind of go for the home run, but defensive end is that position that I like to do that with.
No, I could totally see that side of the argument. I guess I would say I'm greedy when it comes to defensive linemen. So if I kind of want to, I will spend up for getting a defensive lineman first when I go do my drafts each year in redraft for IDP. And so, yeah, I want the guy who gets me tackles in, gets me pressures, and gets me upsides. And I want all of that. Because more often than not,
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and I get the what you're saying as far as getting the consistency at defensive back and linebacker in reverse order. It really comes down to draft strategy, and it comes down to your scoring settings. If you're getting like for Fantasy Pro scoring, I think it's like 5 points for a sack. Well, okay, and 2 points for a quarterback hit, tackle for a loss. Then yeah, I want to go chase the sack, upside there. At the same time, if I can get the tackle upside too, that's a bonus. Then sign me up. When I'm streaming defensive linemen, though, if I go linebacker heavy, then I'm definitely paying attention to the tackle numbers just because I want to get as much upside and elevated floor for my defensive lineman as I can.
Yeah, so I interpreted. I was reading it as just defensive lineman. I don't know if were we talking all positions. I didn't know if we were talking all positions. Did you?
I think he's talking. I think he's talking about defensive lineman,
okay.
But yeah. So yeah. Let's see here. Okay, so let's go to the next player on the list here, and this one hurts because I lost to Nate Markham in a heavily contested matchup this week in one of our IDP Dynasty leagues. Because Mr. Josie Jewell, Mr. Double-Digit Fantasy Producer, over the past weeks from 5 through 8, averaging 80.8% of snap share, decided to put up a dud with 6.8 points, and the Denver Broncos decided to only use him on 61% of total defensive snaps, 22% on third and fourth down. He dealt with an injury earlier in the season, but he came back. He had a high snap percentage, like I said, 80.8%, and then boom, down to 61%. Do you think what we saw this past week is, mirage or money of what we're getting from him going forward?
Well, I mean, a little of both. I mean, I wouldn't have confidence right now in starting him. He's probably going to be in my rankings, in the 30, 40 range, 40 range. I'm usually going to have somebody else that I'd rather start over him. I mean, his snaps were down. That's pretty frustrating. I mean, there was hope earlier in the year that he'd come back healthy and take back the top spot, but Singleton took the green dot and ran with it and just isn't giving it back up. So you get those reduced snaps, even 80%, like you're not going to get too excited. But I mean, this past week, I mean, they played on Monday night, right, against the Bills. And the Bills kept turning it over. So So Denver, I think, was on the field a lot more. So I think in future weeks, like, even if he's not he may not get a high snap percentage, but those Denver linebackers can eat, just because historically, going back to last year, they've been on the field so much. But this past week, they really weren't on the field as much because Buffalo just kept giving the ball back to Denver on offense. So I think he'll be okay. He'll do better than he did this past week, but I'm not necessarily starting him with confidence. And I mean, he's 29 years old. Somebody was asking me today about, like, what do I do from Dynasty? Like, do I drop him and pick up a couple other players? The guy was looking at Diablo was available and Pace was available, and I'm like, I haven't really thought about Dynasty in a while, but like, Jewel's on the final year of a contract, 29 years old. Those snaps are coming down. I mean, the reason to really be excited about Jewel this past year was, like, he should have a lot of tackle opportunities in Denver with 100%, but as those snaps go down, it may be time to change at some point.
That's a very good call. Yeah, I want to say this is a mirage and better days are ahead, but that is kind of concerning. What happened, he comes back from injury, he jumps to a high snap percentage, for 4 games, and then all of a sudden back down like that. That's concerning. There's something going on there.
Mm-hmm.
There was rumors heading into the trade deadline that he could potentially be a trade candidate. I don't know what's going on there. There's some disconnect with Jewel and what's going on. You mentioned Alex Singleton taking over the green dot and basically assuming play calling duties on the defensive side of the ball. It's a far cry from what we were saying last year with this tandem at linebacker. I feel like both of these guys each and every week had double digit performances throughout the course of the season. And, I thought heading into 2023 that this is one of the most underrated tandems at linebacker in all of IDP fantasy football. And this past week kind of concerned me a little bit. So, I think what we saw here is money in the sense of this could be indicative of things to come. I don't know. It's a very sketchy, it's a very sticky situation. So we'll have to pay attention to that. Let's go to our last guy. We talked about him earlier in news and notes. Blake Cashman, LB 60 and fantasy pro scoring, with 5.3 points, 54.7% defensive snap share. Holy crap. Where did all the snaps go? They went to Perryman and Christian Harris, which, hey, by the way, Christian Harris is back again. And why not Toa, who is playing? It's to what you alluded to earlier. It's a total crapshoot.
Mm-hmm.
But with Perryman being suspended now, does Blake Cashman roll into, back to the role he had just, a week ago? So with that train of thought, is what you saw in week 10 a mirage, or is it spot on going forward the rest of the season, or at least for the next 2 weeks?
Yeah, I mean, for the next 2 weeks, I mean, if I had to pick one of the three guys that I would want to put in my lineup, it's going to be Cashman. I'm optimistic that he would his snaps would jump back up, and he was productive before earlier in the season without it. I know if for whatever reason, I know Toa missed this past week with a concussion, but like his snaps dropped 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago, and I don't know what he fell out of favor a little bit, but Cashman was doing well. I don't know why he dropped this past week. But of the three guys, I would feel most confident about putting him in my lineup for the next 2 weeks, and then all bets are off when Perriman comes back.
Right. No, totally agree with you. Well, we did a clean sweep of mirages here, and thinking at least for the next 2 weeks with Blake Cashman, he will return to more of a full-time role. Sweet. Well, we've gone through news and notes. We did Money and Mirage, and now let's get into some plays and fades. All right, as we do every week, we talk about players who were playing this week and players who were fading this week. Go figure, plays and fades. So let's start with defensive line, and we're talking about this from a true position standpoint, meaning your defensive ends, your defensive tackles, and your outside linebackers, aka your edge rushers, all clumped into a defensive lineman spot. Leo, who do you got for us in terms of a play or plays this week?
Yeah, so I mean, first I'm going to start out with an easy one that TJ Watt. Sometimes I look at those top 5 or 6 defensive linemen and like who do I want to play this, or who do I put in my lineup this week, or who do I think is going to have a big week? And I think TJ Watt's going to have one. I mean, he's got Cleveland. He's got the matchup with Cleveland. I think he wants something to prove against going up against Myles Garrett on the opposite side. We got DTR at quarterback for the Browns after Deshaun Watson's out. I think DTR let up 4 sacks in his one game he played against Baltimore earlier in the year. Cleveland's already productive in allowing points to defensive ends, because of they run the ball so much, but also because they're banged up at defense at offensive tackle. So they got their top 2 guys I think were out this past week. Jake Conklin was out. DeJuan Jones, I'm not sure what his status for this week is, but I think TJ Watt's somebody, he's going to have a big week. He's somebody that I think could really pop off a big week. With Fantasy Pros, we also put these guys into linebackers, and I'm shooting them up my linebacker rankings too. I know we're talking true position today, but I'm expecting a big week out of Watt. But I'll also throw in a lower name that I'm higher on than most people is DJ Wonham from Minnesota. He's not as good as Danielle Hunter, but like we talked earlier, sometimes when somebody else gets attention, it frees up some space, and I think he can do. He can put up some decent numbers. I think he got a sack this past week, and they go against Denver. What I really like about him too is a 93% snap share this past week. Danielle Hunter probably has a little bit better matchup with going against McGlinchey, but I think Wonham goes against Bowles this week. But they let up 2.5 sacks this past. Denver let up 2.5 sacks to Buffalo this past week. I think he could do something. I have him a little bit higher up than most people at Fantasy Pros right now.
All right. Well, if you're going to play those 2 guys, then who are you fading this week in Week 11?
Yeah, so I'm going to do the same thing. Who are those top guys that don't think is going to have as big a week as they normally do? And I'm going to go with Nick Bosa. Obviously, I'm of the belief you start your studs, but I rank all these guys from one to 60 usually in defensive line. I usually go that deep. And Bosa's a little, not as high as I typically have him. He faces Tampa Bay this week. I think they're 31st in points allowed to defensive ends, 29th in sacks allowed to defensive ends. Tampa Bay allows more sacks actually to defensive tackles than defensive ends. So I don't think he has a great week. and Bosa is very sack dependent for his scoring. He's not a tackle monster like we talked about some of those guys. So if he doesn't get that sack, he's going to disappoint you. Doesn't mean he can't. You don't want sometimes you don't want to sit those guys, but it's not somebody that I'm expecting a big week from. The second guy I have on here is not necessarily somebody that's in your top 10, but is going to probably butcher this name, Tulu Tuapolauti, I think.
Tuli Tuapolutu.
Okay.
Palutu.
For the Chargers. I haven't had to say that name yet, but he plays for the Chargers. He's a rookie that's actually done pretty decent this past year, but we saw a steep decline in snap share this past week. He went from 62 to 38%, and he only had 1 assist last week. So very, kind of surprising and shocking. We saw Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa got an uptick in snap share this past week. So I'm kind of fading him. Just the production wasn't there. The snaps weren't there. He's somebody that's fallen down where I've been ranking him.
He that is a crazy decrease in snaps. My eyes just went super wide when you mentioned that, because he had been playing so well.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden you see this stark decline there. Before we get to linebackers, which is everybody's favorite position to talk to, let me talk to you about a couple defensive backs I'm playing and fading this week. Playing with confidence, the DB11 in Fantasy Pro scoring with 15.5 points in Week 10. That would be Mr. Keanu Neal. Played 37.5% of snaps in the box on Sunday versus the Packers, tallying 8 total tackles, a pass defense, and interception. Look, here's the beautiful thing of Keanu Neal. He's always, over the course of his career, and especially for IDP purposes, delivered you good tackle numbers, especially when playing at that safety role, coming down in the box. Fantastic. Whether it was in all those years in Atlanta, he was serviceable in Dallas as a deep, IDP flex option. Didn't get, too many great performances out of him in Tampa Bay, but he comes to Pittsburgh. Minka Fitzpatrick, is out currently, still dealing with the hamstring injury. But here's the beautiful thing: that he has a great matchup against Cleveland. First of all, second, you look at going forward. Even when Fitzpatrick comes back, we could see Keanu Neal move up and play that linebacker role, because, as we talked about earlier, the Steelers are hurting at linebacker. And we've seen Keanu Neal play both at the linebacker role and defensive back safety role. So for me, he is a solid start for me. Do I think he's going to give you DB1 upside each and every week? No, but I think he's definitely in the DB2 discussion going forward in Pittsburgh, especially with just the injuries mounting up at the linebacking position. Him playing, both of those roles, but still being counted as a defensive back is a great little cheat code for fantasy. Speaking of cheat codes, is my fade this week. And man, this guy, he had 2 really damn good weeks.
Mm-hmm.
He was defensive back, however, not this past week. 131, which is, wow, that's crazy. With only 3 points scored, Mr. Marquise Bell, 39.8% defensive snap share versus the Giants, playing at linebacker. And one of the things we've talked about him in the previous few weeks is, depending on your platform, like, for example, Sleeper, they gave him both linebacker and defensive back dual eligibility, which is the cheat code of cheat codes, because, yes, give me a linebacker's, tackle upside as a defensive back, counting it as a defensive back. I am all about that. That 39.8%, though, defensive snap share, compare that to the 2 prior weeks, 83.5% average. We've seen Rashaan Evans kind of basically usurp Bell as the LB2 there next to Damone Clark in Week 10. That seems to be what the trend should be going forward. So I'm fading Marquise Bell. Thanks for the cheat code for those 2 weeks. It was great knowing you, but back to the waiver pool you go. So Definitely playing Cashman-HOU, definitely fading Marquise Bell. All right, let's finish off the show talking about everybody's favorite IDP position, linebacker. Who's a play for you this week?
Yeah, before we get into that, I want to touch a little bit on those two guys that you mentioned.
Yeah. Go for it.
Yeah, so Keanu-Neal, so we will just have to keep an eye on injury. Both Fitzpatrick and Neal did not practice today. So just something to keep an eye on. I don't know the severity of either, and it's early. I mean, this is early in the week, so just keep an eye on both of those situations because that could change either. But I agree with you that, like, I mean, they may need him at linebacker too with everything that's going on. So just keep an eye on the injury before you insert him in your lineup, both for him and Fitzpatrick. Marquise Bell, yeah, I have to agree with you, but that whole game was weird. I mean, they got up big, so snaps, I think the top defender was like 74%. Bland, I think, had 74, but like Damone Clark had 53%. So I think his snaps may go back up a little bit, but definitely I'm waiting a week to see that go back up. So it's just a weird game. And we saw the tackle lines when they came out, and they all seemed a little low. And I'm like, what's going on here? And they got up big, but there's something else kind of going on with the way they're divvying up the snaps in Dallas this past week. But go ahead.
We got a question here from Rugaroo in the chat. He wants to know Thule or George Karlaftis this week going against Philadelphia.
I would go Karlaftis this week. It just with those slow snaps that we talked about for Thule, I would go Karlaftis.
Then we have another question here from Chandler Constantino. Welcome. Start Eric Kendricks or Alex Anzalone this week?
I think I have Kendricks ahead. I mean, he's not at 100% snaps, but I've kind of faded Alex Anzalone all season, so I'm not changing now.
Very nice. All right, speaking of linebackers, let's get into the last couple linebackers, plays and fades. Who you got for us, Leo?
Sure. So, I think we talked about him a little bit earlier. I'm playing Landon Roberts. I'm plugging him. I'm picking him up if I get on the waivers, and I'm plugging him in. Great matchup against Cleveland. I think. Like we talked about those injuries to Quan Alexander and Cole Holcomb. I know some people are a little bit worried about Michael Walker coming in, but I'm plugging him in with confidence. All indications are he's got the green dot. He should be on the field. So I'm putting him in there. It's too good of a matchup for me not to put him in. But on the flip side, the guy I'm fading this week is Jordyn Brooks. I think that I looked at the consensus this week on ECR, and I think it was somewhere around like a linebacker 11. I probably have him a little bit lower to like 20 or something right now. What concerned me a little bit, so his snap share dropped this past week to 80%. He only had 3 tackles. Anytime, it's hard to put a guy that's not playing over 90% into my top 20 linebackers. It's just hard to get the production there without the snaps. They play the Rams this week. That sometimes they pass the ball quite a bit. Cooper Kupp and Puka. So they're a lot better matchup for cornerbacks than linebackers. So combination of not doing too much this past week, lower snap shares, the Rams. I'm fading Jordyn Brooks this week.
Very nice. Yeah, Jordyn Brooks last week, the LB 71 with 3.8 points fantasy pro scoring. I don't think I've ever seen him have that low of a total before, but very valid points there. So, Leo, that's going to do it here for Shoot the Gap this week, heading into week 11. Thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join me here this evening. Again, for those just catching the end of the show, please tell everybody where they can find your work.
Sure. You can find my work over at rpofootball.com. We have our IDP rankings up there. We also have IDP prop bets. We're getting heavy into that and finding those value picks for you to make some money. so far in the year. I think we're at about 70% win rate on those. I have my buddy at Tackle Box Props helping me out with that, and at Jimmer Simpson, those guys have been crushing it. We've had 10 straight winning profitable weeks, which is not necessarily easy to do, but we're scouring these lines, looking for anywhere to take an advantage. And yeah, come check us out on rpofootball.com.
Very nice. And Leo, we got to get you back on once Hollywood and Nate are back. They would love to talk shop with you. I know they missed not seeing you this week. So for everybody else tuning in, make sure to head over to fantasyandframes.com on Friday for our IDP starts and sits article, as well as tune into the pregame show on Sunday from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m., where we cover every single game and all the fantasy relevant players on both sides of the ball. And don't forget the Daily Fix Show. Our DFS show is coming back starting this Friday evening. Stay tuned tomorrow for an exact time. But Keith Fleming, Joe Matz, they are back here at Fantasy and Frames, cranking out all sorts of great DraftKings DFS content for you. So for Leo, I'm Jorge. Gator J, take us home.